I'm Jay Horton. I make movies that make money, and this is Filmmakers On. Today, I'm talking crowdfunding with the author of the best-selling crowdfunding book, Crowdfunding Basics in 30 Minutes: How to Use Kickstarter, Indiegogo, and Other Crowdfunding Platforms to Support Your Entrepreneurial and Creative Dreams. Whew, that's quite a title. Michael's going to break down some of his best practices for us when it comes to crowdfunding. Let's do the interview thing. So I'm here with best-selling author, or I should say selling author, Michael J Epstein.
Depends on how you define best, right?
Well, you're the best-selling author that I've ever talked to.
All right, that's fair.
So what was the name of your book, your crowdfunding book?
The name of the book, I have a copy here, is called Crowdfunding Basics in 30 Minutes. And it was written for there's a series called In 30 Minutes that's like little primers on a bunch of different topics. They have various computer topics like Excel and Google Docs. And then they have topics like genealogy, just all kinds of different things. Very cool series. And so, so I got to write the entry for that series on crowdfunding, which is a fun one.
That's really cool. So what possessed you to write a book on crowdfunding?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the big things was that there was a lot of information on crowdfunding and a lot of like guides to it and a lot of tips and best practices for it, but they were all kind of based on existing models of people who are really successful. So I used to live in Boston and was involved in music pretty heavily there. And so a lot of people were starting to do music crowdfunding projects. And so they would look at Amanda Palmer as an example. I don't know if you know Amanda Palmer, but anyway, she had a huge fan base. And so she was able to raise a lot of money, and people would say, well, if she can do it, then, then I can also do it. But almost none of the things that you might, look at in terms of how she approached it apply to people like me, or probably you, or, anybody listening, most likely. So what we had done a bunch of campaigns for our films, and we learned a lot. We made many, many mistakes the first time, somewhat fewer mistakes the second time. And I would say the same number, but different mistakes the third time. Based on those lessons, I started working on other campaigns and things like that. And I thought, here's a real opportunity to approach this from the perspective of somebody who doesn't really have a large fan base or large following, really just somebody who's looking to go to friends and family and then expand that, outward as much as possible to do projects.
Okay, well, let's go back to some of those like early ones where we were making some mistakes. What were some of the initial mistakes that you made?
I think the biggest mistake that probably everybody makes is giving rewards that end up consuming all of your life. So, it becomes as big as the actual, like we're doing film. So it becomes as big as making the film to actually fulfill the rewards for the campaign. And I mean, some of the stuff was really fun to do. Like we did a variety of rewards that were things like lip syncing to a song of choice on set. But then you start to learn, like when you get 15 of those and you have to do them on set, you're like, where do we find the time to like force actors who are already busy, working on their other stuff to now like learn songs and lip sync to them. And so stuff like that. I mean, it's really about building a connection to the people who are giving money, but you don't want to turn it into something that's very expensive or very time consuming. So I think that was the number one lesson, I think, right away. And I'll give you the number two was understanding who the actual audience, who the people who would actually pay into a crowdfunding campaign were. Because at first it appears like, oh, I just put this thing up. I've got a great idea. I have an amazing movie. I'm like the greatest creator of all time. Everybody's going to love this idea and be psyched about it. And then it turns out that people don't really care that much about what anybody is doing. I mean, we live in a pretty indifferent world.
Yeah.
Which is fine. I mean, you just have to know that like you have to spark that excitement and interest in people. And it's going to start with people and then you can kind of grow that, from there. But it really does take an enormous amount of work to administer the whole campaign and to build that audience, much more than people think.
Right. And so these initial campaigns for you, were they successful?
Yeah. You know what? I'm trying to think about this. I've never run an unsuccessful campaign.
Wow.
Which is Part luck. In the beginning, I would say it was luck. And at this point, it's that we know what the scale should be, and we know how to set expectations for it, and to operate, knowing that we'll be able to do it. So it's, this is all very modest stuff. This is 10, 20,000, campaigns generally. That's most of the stuff that we've done. I prefer approaching it like, if the campaign doesn't succeed, the project doesn't happen.
Right.
A lot of people are doing kind of like the partial funding ones, like Indiegogo, things like that. So we've always done Kickstarter campaigns.
All or nothing.
All or nothing. And the reason is because you need to me, I think you need to really inspire people to believe that they are part of a project that absolutely will not exist in the world without their, support and their contribution. And I think that does inspire people. You get people contributing more as the time goes. They see it, it hasn't quite reached its goal yet, so I better throw in another $100, or I better ask my friends to contribute because I want to be part of this thing. And I know that, it's not going to happen without that. So I think that's a really big part of it, inspiring the gaming part of it, I guess, is what I would call it, and so the contributors become part of the game. Like, they want to see you actually get to the end. They're not just like, fine, here's some money, do the thing. They're actually invested in the goals of the project and the success of the project.
Right. So if you're picking a project to crowdfund, like, what are some of the, I hate to use the word criteria, but what are some of the things you look for in a project that this might be good for crowdfunding?
Yeah, absolutely. So I do a lot of consults as well. And I would say, this is going to sound funny, but I would say 3/4 of the consults I do involve, the person bringing what they've got to me and me telling them what they need to do in order to make it successful. And then they decide not to do the crowdfunding on the project, which is the right choice. I mean, honestly. So I think, it's somewhat about the project and more about the audience and the fan base and the connection with sets of people who will want to be part of the thing. So I would say the project needs to be something that people will be inspired by and want to contribute to. I had somebody recently come to me about working on a project or asking for advice on a project where it was like to shoot basically a sizzle for a movie. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, look, you're making this sizzle that's not even intended for an audience. Nobody's like, why is somebody going to contribute to this thing that nobody's going to see? They're not really part of a project that's like going to be out in the world. It's not really the kind of thing that's going to super inspire people. Like, you might be able to get your friends and family to like want to support you and give you money. But I think people generally want to be part of something that's then going to be out in the world that they can say, look at this thing. It's really cool. And my name is on it, or I'm part of it, or, I contributed in some way to the success of this project. So that was a very vague answer, but I think, it needs to be something that people will be proud of being part of. That's what I would say.
Right. So what do you say to people who they come to a project, say the project's fantastic, like it looks great. I think people would probably be excited about this, but say the person has like basically zero social proof. Yeah.
I mean, that's really tough, honestly. I mean, one of the things I advise is that before you even launch, don't launch and then be like, let's see how the thing does. Right. You need to reach out to your friends and family and people you have connections to. So everybody, I mean, most people have some base.
Yeah.
Right. And that base may be modest. It may not be thousands of people, but it may be tens of people who would be willing to participate in that. So you need to reach out to that base in advance of the launch of the project and get them to kind of commit to participating in it. And you can ask them, you can say, how much money would you be willing and comfortable to contribute to this project on day one when it launches? And so you get a sense, based on doing that, you get a sense of like, what is a reasonable goal for the project? So if it's a great project and they have a small base and they tell me they want to raise $1 million, I'm going to say, that you need to rethink that, right? You need to find ways to cut that in half. A lot of times people bring projects and they say, I want to raise $100,000. And I say, well, what, is there a version of this that you can do for half that or a quarter of that? Is there a variation? Or maybe it's a multi-phase thing. It's like 5 movies, $100,000. And I'm like, well, what about maybe one movie,
right.
$20,000? So it's really scaling. If they don't have a base, it's really scaling to the size of that base. Honestly, I mean, that's you can't. There's no. You can't just say, well, I don't have a base and I'm not going to, there's a little doggy in the background. You can't just say, I don't have a base and I'm not going to develop that base and I'm just going to expect that magically I'm going to raise money. It's just not going to happen. So
right. Yeah.
Part of the criteria.
I know I've been a part of like 3 or 4, and the 2 that didn't meet their goals, it was pretty much the same thing. You know, like we launched, didn't really have an idea of the audience or how to reach them, just thought it was a good project. Like, you know, I have lots of Facebook friends, I can do this. And of course, you know, neither met their goal.
Yeah. I mean, we've talked about this outside of this, but you're just numbers, like social media numbers are not a meaningful thing necessarily. It's like how engaged are those people that, you know, you're involved with. And we were lucky when we started doing crowdfunding. We describe it as cheating, but we had played in bands for years. And so we had a base of people who were really interested in our music. You know, we already had some, not, you know, this is modest. I'm not talking thousands and thousands of people, but we had a modest base of people who are already interested in our creative output. And so then when we started doing film and we said like, okay, we want to do this film, those people already kind of trusted us, even though we had no real record of, you know, success in film. It was really our first feature. We made some shorts and stuff, but those people already were like, we appreciate your creative attitude and your creative output, and we want to see, you know, whatever this project is going to be, we want to see the success of it. So we cheated in that sense that we had a little bit of that base, but you know, every project can be scaled to whatever resources that you have there. And again, if you want to do a huge project, you maybe start smaller if you don't have the base.
Let's take me through a hypothetical campaign setup. So let's say most of my audience are going to be low budget filmmakers. They're making movies for, you know, 25,000 or under. Let's say we were going to raise $20,000 for a project. What timeline? What would the timeline look like? Like how much prep would there be? What you'd go Kickstarter, how long the campaign would be, so on, what kind of perks?
So the planning phase really, it often takes several months, and it depends somewhat on what you know, how efficiently you can pull together a bunch of different resources. But I think the first thing to do is basically outline what the project is, you know, write a kind of a treatment, like almost like a pitch treatment. Outline what the project is, explain why you need the money for it so that you have a clear message that you can bring to people. And then the first thing that I do at that point usually is go out to people, you know, like your close friends, have them look at that, see if it sounds intriguing to them, ask them what kinds of things they would want to receive as rewards, you know, for participating in that. And a lot of people at this point, people have a pretty good idea of how rewards are structured, because there's, you know, a pretty good set of practices for film. I'm a huge fan of reward, and I think contributors are as well, of rewards that cost nothing but feel exciting to people. So things like thank you credits in the film. We did for our second film, we had a whole bunch of opportunities to put people's names in it and like little Polaroids of people in it.
Right.
It fit the movie. I mean, it was just part of it.
Yeah.
So like, you know, people contributed some amount of money and they would be like basically a character that was a Polaroid in a thing that gets their name mentioned. And we let them choose their occupation. So they say like this person, you know, whatever their occupation was. Right. So people love stuff like that, right? So
I was saying one thing that I've seen quite a bit of recently are people doing associate producers, executive producers, stuff like that. What's your feelings on that?
Yeah, I have mixed feelings on that. We've gone back and forth. We've done that a bunch of times. I mean, executive producer is fine because that sort of clearly is just like somebody gave you money. I think for that, once you start getting into the other ones, it gets, I mean, a producer credit it should have meaning, right? But it doesn't really.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I'm okay with it. I don't know. I mean, it feels a little strange to mix like producer credits with people who actually participated in the production of the film and people who really had nothing to do with it.
Gotcha.
Our last film, we added a credit called like consulting producer or something. We made up like some credit that was like a little bit different than somebody who was participating in the film.
Right.
But at the end of the day, again, it's just people wanting to be part of something. This is like the thank you credit. It's like
Yeah.
an elevated thank you credit, right? So it's giving them an opportunity to have their name on something, and feel like they're part of it, and that they can say when the thing comes out, like, I'm a producer on this film.
Right.
Um,
So in that vein, there's another one that I think I know what you're going to say, because I think I feel the same way. People that do acting,
yeah. Again, I have mixed feelings
act
about that.
like pay for a role kind of
Yeah,
thing.
pay for a role. It feels a little funny to me. I'm not criticizing anybody who does it. If it's a choice, I think, within the creative context of your film.
Hmm.
Um, I've worked on films that have had people who with paid roles. Like I said, we had paid quasi roles. They're not actually, like, the people didn't have to do any acting, but they appeared on screen even.
Right.
Um, yeah, I feel like it's a little weird because the people are really almost they should be paid for participating in the film and not paying for it. And it does tie people up a little bit in the sense that now they're stuck with this person who may or may not be an actor, who may or may not really do the things that they're supposed to do on set.
Yeah.
It creates a
Yeah.
weird dynamic a little bit. But you know, I see a lot of that. It's common. I don't think it's necessarily disastrous to do it. I tend not to myself.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where if you and the people participating go into it with a clear set of expectations and like what the problems might be. One problem that I've personally seen pop up, well, two problems. One is, the you finish the movie and you have this part, and in editing sometimes you have to cut stuff, create to make it creatively better. But if the person is paid for this thing and you're not going to refund them, you kind of have a moral responsibility to keep them in and maybe hurt
Absolutely.
the movie.
Yeah.
And
Our
then,
first film, we had a contribution, like a reward where you could put a piece of art in the movie.
mm,
And so there was a scene where a character is like walking down the hallway and like criticizing the art. It's like kind of a throwaway thing, but she's just like, oh, this is dreadful, this is awful, whatever.
right.
And so, we shot that and we had it, and then, like you said, ended up wanting to cut it. But we had like 3 contributors who had paid money to have that in it. So I mean, it's not the
Yeah.
movie is not ruined by that, but you're right. You're making creative decisions based on a requirement of the context of the movie, and not the aesthetics of the movie itself. So
Right.
yeah, it's not ideal.
What are some other types of perks that have worked well for you?
I mean, the very common ones, of course, are like Blu-rays or DVDs or posters or T-shirts or all kinds of things like that. I feel like one of the big things that I've seen with that kind of stuff is that the price of that should be somewhat commensurate with what it would cost later.
Yeah.
Because what happens a lot of times is that people will be like $50 for a Blu-ray, and then the movie comes out and like the same Blu-ray is for sale for $15, and the contributors are get kind of pissed off.
Right. Yeah, I
As a
can
result
totally
of
see that.
So we try to do things that are special. If we're going to do like a DVD or a Blu-ray or something, it's like a limited edition special version that nobody else will get later, signed by, cast and crew.
That makes sense.
So it's at least something, above and beyond what that is. We've also had good, luck with things like Polaroids from set, messages, special video messages from set, postcards from set. That's a popular one. We make all of our poor actors have to sign like hundreds of postcards on set. We've done, like I said, we did lip sync music video lip syncs where they choose a song, and then usually on set we have the actors or people crew do like a lip sync to it. That can be fun if it's not overwhelming and taking up too much time. Trying to think of other big ones that we've done. I mean, going up to producer credits or placement in the film, or naming an element of the film or a character in the film, things along those lines. People do really like to contribute in some way, especially something that appears on screen, which is why I think people like buying those actor roles. But it's a variety of opportunities. We did, like, our second film was very heavily involved in cassettes and like analog technology. So we did a special like cassette version of the score for the film that was only available to backers.
That's cool.
So yes, merch that's like really unique to the film. We've done props many, many times. So like the Walkmans in that movie, we had 3 or 4 of them. And so like a certain contribution got you that prop from the movie signed. Our first movie had these pig masks, and we had maybe a dozen of those for the movie. So we sent those to backers. Props are great because like otherwise they go in storage anyway for a lot of them, right? I don't really need to keep a dozen pig masks necessarily. So if it's something that you can basically sell, we usually do scripts. We have copies of the script that are signed by everybody. And again, those are things that we don't cost us extra. I think that's a key element. It's like stuff that we have around their production scripts that we have copies of around on set anyway. So they're going to either go in the trash or somebody's going to put them on a shelf. We may as well get $100 or something and have everybody sign them and send them off to people. So stuff like that. Anything that doesn't cost extra is a great way to go, because what happens a lot of times is you raise 20 grand and then you realize, oh, I have to spend, $5,000 making merch and shipping stuff. Like our first film, I mean, now I think things are a little bit better on most of the platforms where you can charge extra for shipping, especially to other countries. But our first film, none of that really existed when we started using Kickstarter. So you had to just be like, well, here's the reward. If you live in Australia, I guess it's fine. We won't worry about it. But then, it costs $10 or $12 to mail something there. So that's, cutting into the cost of cutting into the value of that contribution when we're sending out like DVD rewards or things along those lines.
Okay. Yeah. So I know you said that you prefer Kickstarter. How long a campaign do you typically like to run? What do you think is a good sweet spot for?
Yeah, I think 30 days is great. I mean, I didn't totally answer all the parts of your previous question. This is a good piece.
Yeah, I was just kind of leading.
Yeah. Because I think 30 days is great because, first of all, I think if you're running a campaign, you pretty much need to be working every day on that campaign. So when you do a 60 or 90 day campaign, like, oof, it eats into 60 or 90 days of your life. So get the thing over with. I mean, if you can pull it off in 2 weeks or 3 weeks, I would even say, the shorter the better in a sense. We find that like 30 days is pretty solid for us. For that 30 days, we really plan out like day one is the launch. We already have X number of people who have agreed to contribute on day one. That way, you launch the campaign, immediately you're at 25 or 30% funded day one, and then everybody else who's looking at it is like, wow, everybody's excited about this campaign. I should also contribute, right? Because there's a lot of enthusiasm that snowballs. Like if you have a campaign, you see this probably all the time where somebody's like, I'm going to raise $200,000, and day 5 of their campaign, there's like $7 contributed to it. Right? So to me, that's a complete failure, not of like even the success of the campaign, but that's a complete failure in planning, because the thing you should never be launching without already a huge chunk of that, basically ready to go in as contributions on day 1. Then, day 2, day 3, day 4, you need to be releasing new content, new video content. Often we announce like the actors each day we announce a new actor who's involved in the movie, and then they really start sharing it with their friends and so on. We might, for some of the movies, we shot scenes in advance and we're like, here's, a little clip of the thing, or here's some behind the scenes stills of the first scene that we shot. But you really need new content, because honestly, people get really sick of you posting every day, like, here's my campaign, give me money. But if you can make it exciting every day, like they're learning a little bit more about your project, they're learning a little bit more about the movie, there's a new interview, if you can arrange press that's coming out, each of the days, then people are excited about it. And honestly, I think people do often need to hear about the campaign 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times before they actually pull the trigger on putting money in. Because a lot of people think like, oh, I already posted it on Facebook, I'm done, right? Everybody's seen it, all finished. Right. But you do need to hit people repeatedly. You do need to do direct outreach. And I think sustaining that for longer than 30 days is kind of like just committing to a great amount of suffering that you shouldn't commit to. That's my view anyway.
So So I would assume most of the promotion for these is social media. So like, what are some of your social media best practices for sharing crowdfunding stuff?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's constantly changing, and I think it depends a lot on where your audience is. So, like for me, I'm much stronger on Facebook than I am on like Instagram and Twitter. But other people may have like bigger Twitter bases or Instagram bases. But I do think you need to use all of those things. So the first piece is when you launch the campaign, you always have a little video, and people want to make like 20-minute videos that have every detail in the world in them,
Right.
that go on. And I absolutely recommend a video that's like maybe 1 minute. If you can keep it to 1 minute, awesome. You
Yeah.
know what? Day 5, you can release a second video that's another minute. Day 10, you can release a third video that's another minute. But nobody's going to watch it. I mean, I've looked at the stats. I've tracked. Okay, I've done a campaign with a video, and I track where how much of that video people watch, and they hardly ever make it more than like a minute into the video.
Yeah.
At that point, they know if they're going to contribute or not. So you need to nail it right away, whatever it is. That video is going to be powerful on every social media platform, including Instagram. Again, if you have short video content, Instagram is a great place for it. If you have strong visual content, again, Instagram, Pinterest. I know you've been using Pinterest a lot.
Yeah, I'm just getting into it.
Yeah, places that have more visual focused content. Those are the things that you want to do in those social media platforms. On Facebook, I think you want to engage a little more in a longer form, kind of written thing explaining why you're making the movie, what the reasons are that people might want to contribute. You have a little more space there. Twitter is a condensed version of that, right? So every platform, it's not like you just take some copy you wrote and a picture and just throw it on every platform. You really have to tailor each piece to the audience on each platform and to your specific audience. Mm-hmm. So you probably know who your friends and followers are on these platforms. You probably know the kinds of things that interest them. You probably know what kinds of posts you make that engage people. So you need to find a way to shape your story for this into something that is going to engage people and be meaningful. So that was a vague answer, right? There's no.
Yeah, I mean, there is no magic bullet to any of it. So it's you have to come at it from an organic process.
Yeah, absolutely. I wish everybody wants like the quick answer, right? They're like, well, what do? I just post this one thing and I get my $100,000 and then I make my movie or whatever. But it really is just a very dynamic campaign, and you have to be ready to constantly pivot and say like, okay, this isn't working. What are the changes I need to make? And we usually plan, like, if we're going to do a 30-day campaign, I have a 30-day calendar of content, like written in advance, posts written in advance. Wow. But at the same time, if I see something is working or something is not working, you make adjustments to that to figure out how to do it. There's no definitive best answer. I think the best practices for social media are the same as, for all other social media. Engagement is a big thing. So you're not, I always say the biggest value of social media, I think I'll step back even further. The how to win friends and influence people, those kind of books, like, right? Mm-hmm. They always say that the most important thing is engaging people and making them feel like you're listening to them and interested in what they're looking to do, what they want. And so if you can find ways on social media to engage people and to ask them what they're interested in, ask them what they want, that's a lot more exciting than like just broadcasting constantly, like, give me money for my thing, give me money for my thing. So, a lot of times we ask questions about our movie. We say, what kinds of rewards would you like? Sometimes we do rewards where we know we're going to add rewards later, like we don't put them in initially. Mm-hmm. And we're like, we ask people what they want and then kind of like add rewards as that goes. But anything you can do to like get people, you see this, I mean, this is like almost like becoming transparently lame practice now on social media, but you see pages like, especially in horror, in our little world of horror, you see pages that are for, magazines or outlets or news outlets or other things, where they're like, they post their stories and then every other post is like, who's better, Freddie or Jason? Right. And it just gets people to like, to comment on the thing. It's kind of transparent, like, but that is a way to engage social media followers. And honestly, when you get a lot of comments on a post, not to sound, cold about it. But when you have a post like that that gets a lot of comments or a lot of likes, it means that your next post after it is going to be seen by more people, because the algorithm favors, like if you're successful, the algorithm favors you, in your subsequent things. So sometimes we'll look to do that where we get a really successful post and then we'll move things around and say, okay, this one's really successful and we know we have a big audience right now, so we better do this other thing that like engages with that audience.
Makes sense.
A lot of social media tricks like that. Yeah.
So let me ask, so it's been a little while since you've headed up a campaign. Why the break?
Because the amount of work is enormous. So yeah, we have not crowdfunded for our last couple of movies. And the reason is that the commitment to actually running the campaign is so huge. Mm-hmm. And then the commitment to backers is huge. So you're now, stuck with that group of people and having to appease them and to, deliver things to them. And we've just had small enough films that we've been able to do them without running that. And our plan has been to kind of save for a, bigger crowdfunding campaign for a project that we think we really need it for.
Gotcha.
But yeah, I mean, it's not the kind of thing that I want to run constantly. I mean, I know some people run a crowdfunding campaign every 3 months. I feel like it occupies your whole life in ways that I just don't want to be doing. And like I said, in the meantime, I've done consults for a whole bunch of people. Like, so I talk to people all the time about running campaigns or help with running campaigns. But for us, yeah, we've really, the same reason that I talk people out of running their own campaigns, I think I talk us out of running our campaigns. We still have rewards on some of our last stuff. We have a couple of things that we still need to deliver on. It's like embarrassing at this point that we haven't quite delivered. But they become complicated after a while, and you want to make sure you do it the right way and that you treat people with as much respect as possible with it. One of the benefits of crowdfunding is that you have an engaged audience for your films. So let's forget the money for a second.
Right.
If you have 200 or 300 or 500 backers, you know that the day that film comes out, you have 200 or 300 or 500 people who are interested in seeing it.
Yeah.
And that's a really meaningful and useful thing. And we've found that now we have a little bit of that audience already without having to, go through the crowdfunding part of it. We already have that audience engaged. So we have not needed it as much for that. And for the money, it's like less, to me, the amount of money is less worth it than the engagement is.
Right. I think that's a really good point. So, I've done a few campaigns, and even the unsuccessful ones, I mean, what I learned from them about marketing, about reaching people, about engagement, like it's a 101 education in marketing. So like, I totally recommend people, like if they're thinking about doing a crowdfunder, like do it, but don't do it knowing that you may not get your money, but you will get an education out of it if you approach it correctly.
Absolutely. And, like I said, I really tend to prefer the Kickstarter all or nothing model. A lot of people do the Indiegogo model, and I think that's fine. I think it's a less compelling argument, but if you're just like, well, I'm going to make this movie anyway, I just want to see if I can get some people on board with it, that's fine. I tend to see those campaigns do worse. Like I tend to see Indiegogo campaigns, partial funding campaigns don't perform as well. And I think sometimes they would have performed much better if they had been, presented as dire, right? So it's in a way you're guilting your friends and family, right? You're saying like, if you don't contribute to this, like I'm not making it, it's your fault. Which is a little bit, there's definitely some, with all this stuff, there's some like balance of ethics and practice, but I think people tend to find it fun more than anything. They tend to want to be engaged. So it's not like, you're not holding anybody up in the street and demanding that they contribute to your crowdfunding campaign.
All right. Do you have any last words of wisdom about crowdfunding, or you think we covered it?
The biggest thing that I always tell people is it's going to be 10 times as much work as you think it's going to be. And really, like, you just need to be ready to be really, really involved for the entire time the campaign is run. You know, if you're going to commit to that, you just need to commit to it. You need to really be ready for that commitment, and be ready to, you know, engage an audience for that period of time.
Well, Michael, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Let's throw up your book one last time.
Yeah, sure. Crowdfunding Basics in 30 minutes.
And where can people find this?
Oh, it's on all the you know, book platforms like Amazon and Barnes and Noble and wherever else. And there's soft cover, hardcover, and ebook versions of it. So
and
you
should do with those dulce tones. You should do a audiobook.
Yeah. That's I could yell at people and be like, make sure you're ready to do this. No, there's a lot of, you know, there are some nice visual elements in this and some nice examples, I think. So it's in the 30-minute series. I would say it probably takes more like an hour to read, but it is a quick read. It really is fast. And I think it's, you know, I wouldn't have written it. I wouldn't have done it if I didn't think that the world needed a book that was at that level of somebody just starting out. And I think to me, I believe, and the reviews seem to agree, that it's a pretty good primer for getting started with this for somebody who doesn't necessarily have that massive fan base. So I hope it helps people. And I encourage people in the back of the book to reach out to me and let me know about their campaigns and ask me questions. And I try to, throw a few bucks into campaigns that reach out to me that way.
Right.
But it's been really interesting hearing from people doing all kinds of different things, from movies to music to a guy who wanted to build an equestrian like horse stadium thing. I mean, just all across the gamut. So
I want to once again thank Michael for taking the time to talk with me. You can find his book, Crowdfunding Basics in 30 Minutes, How to Use Kickstarter, Indiegogo, and other crowdfunding platforms to support your entrepreneurial and creative dreams, on Amazon. But whatever you do, keep making movies.